Japanese.
All right, folks, finally we get to Pearl Harbor, right? And I know you've seen the movie, so it's not that big a deal, but I'm going to go ahead and try to move through this really quickly. Hopefully this time it actually records. So here's the news bulletin from the time.
Pearl Harbor, Hawaii by air, President Roosevelt has just announced. The attack also was made on all naval and military activities on the principal island of Oahu.
And that's what people would have heard Sunday. Now remember the big time difference. So this would have been in the afternoon, or pretty close to the afternoon. People would have been getting out of church or whatever. There were people at ball games and things like that by the time that they heard. Now, of course, you guys know our ships were all parked closely together here. This was known as Battleship Row. I'll show you how that ended up looking all along the way. And why were they all close together? Why were our planes all close together? Because we were worried about sabotage, right? That's why our planes were all close. And I'll show you a picture of them later. Over here, you can see oil storage tanks. You also see some dry docks where you repair ships. Fortunately, the Japanese did not get to those, all right? And that will save us. Now, sabotage was the real fear that people had for this attack. And here's actually a picture from a Japanese pilot who took it. We don't know who did this, but it was recovered later. And you can see several of the ships on Battleship Row are already burning. You also see the date, because I asked you that. And, of course, you guys should know that. The day of the week, it was a Sunday. The time of day, it was about 8 o'clock in the morning. And the date is December 7th, 1941, as you see here. The Japanese declaration of war arrived 30 minutes to an hour after the attack. And how do you think this made Americans feel? Well, enraged, right? You remember that quote from Yamamoto, I feel all we've done is to have awakened a sleeping giant and filled him with a terrible resolve. Americans were angry. You can't forget that when you think about how we fought this war, okay? Now, some of the planes that were used, if you go back up a bit, these were the bombers. This is the Val bomber here. This is the Kate torpedo plane. But the most famous, and one you should just kind of know if you know your stuff, is the Zero. This was the Japanese fighter for the first part of the war. The Japanese made sure that their planes were lighter. They didn't have things like self-sealing gas tanks, so if they got hit, they often caught fire, but they made the planes faster and more maneuverable than the American planes, which were built to protect the pilots and to keep the plane flying. But that is the famous Zero. That's what we called it because it was developed in 1940, and we used the O at the end of 1940. Here you see the ways of attacks, right? They came from the north, making their way through here, curving around, and then coming in all different directions. First wave, a second wave. I don't want to get into all this too much here. Once again, you see Battleship Row. We see here, this is a picture from a Japanese pilot. You see him going right over Battleship Row. This is what it would have looked like that Sunday morning. And then here you see some of our airfields burning, you know, with the planes all nicely lined up, making it easy to drop bombs on them and to strafe them. And here's what our wonderful planes look like afterwards, y'all. This is a picture of Battleship Row. Very, very famous picture. This would be copied in various posters. In fact, when I had that poster that you guys briefly saw that says Avenge Pearl Harbor, you saw an image of this, all right? Battleship Row, Pearl Harbor, December 7th, 1941, a day which shall live in infamy. Now, this picture here is a picture of the USS Arizona. People believe, because of this picture, that the bomb went down the smokestack. Actually, that's just the explosion from inside coming up out of the smokestack. The bomb actually penetrated through the front armor here down into the magazine where all the ammunition and everything is shown. This is where the largest number of casualties were. This is where, and I said in my notes, on this shop, it should be ship, of course, at the bottom of page 15. The largest number of casualties, 1,000 people dead, y'all, were on the USS Arizona, and you saw that in the movie. And here's just another picture of the Arizona, you know, the bridge and everything all leaning over. It's just awful to look at. Now, ultimately, this would all be cut off, taken off to the side, and a memorial would be built. Now, the Oklahoma is the one you guys saw in the movie that rolled over. Now, the Arizona and the Oklahoma were the only battleships of the 8 that did not return back to battle. They did get the Oklahoma straightened out. They righted her, but then the problem, y'all, was that she, it was just the end of the war. It was just too late. And here you see them doing some of that work on the Oklahoma. Men were trapped down in there for weeks or more. And like I said, some of the men they never got to because that's very, very thick armor that you have to cut through. Now, there's a picture here. This is the Pearl Harbor Memorial, particularly to the Arizona. In your picture, you can barely see the outline on your notes of the Arizona down below. This is like kind of a little bit lower tide here. This is the where one of the guns stood. They cut off the superstructure, the bridges and all that. It used to be cages, but they were up on struts and everything. And then they built this. Now, if you look at it in the pictures, you can actually see here is where people stand and go. Mr. D has never had a chance to go, but this is built right on top of it. Oil is still leaking from this ship, y'all. There was so much oil on her that day, and it's gradually, the tank is rusting that holds it, and the oil is, one day it's going to leak out a lot, but fortunately it's been slowly. Some people, y'all, compare it to tears of the 1,000 or so men who were there, and here's a picture of some of that oil that you can see still coming up after 80 plus years, right? And then here's the image that's on your notes, so you can see the ship is actually under there. So you have to kind of go out by boat to go on to the Arizona Memorial. By the way, a lot of the money raised for this, when they built this back in the 60s, was raised by Elvis Presley. That's right, the King. King did a concert out there in Hawaii and raised some money for this. So kind of a neat thing. Elvis was always very supportive of our military, and a lot of people forget. Elvis was in our Army for 2 or 3 years. He was drafted, and he went, and he served, okay? And here is a listing of the men who died on the Arizona. And there were survivors. And what's interesting is a lot of these survivors have since felt survivor's guilt. Why did they live? And their friends died. And some of them have asked that when they died, and the last survivor just died the other day, that their bodies be, when they're cremated, that their cremated remains be put back on the ship so that they can be with their friends that they haven't seen in 80 years. That's something to remember. And here you see the death of some of these people who died since then and have had their bodies interned with their friends.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy. The United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan, was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific.
Okay, now back here, this is the USS Shaw, which was a little ways away. It exploded. Just awful, awful. And by the way, I did not mention on the USS Arizona, there was a Pasadena boy from our Pasadena, P-Town, okay, or P-Dina, whatever, named Bobby Shaw. We've named a school after him. A friend of mine, Jane Galinko, and her husband, Richard, who used to coach decathlon here, they were instrumental in getting that school named for him, setting up kind of a memorial for him, and remembering his sacrifice. He was in the band, and he died that day. A lot of the band members were allowed to sleep in, and so when the bombs happened, they didn't have a chance. Now, so did anybody vote against us? There was a one person. It's hard to imagine anybody voting against going to war when you were attacked like this. But her name was Jeanette Rankin, R-A-N-K-I-N. She had voted with quite a few other people against going into World War I. But nobody else but Jeanette Rankin, the first woman to ever be in Congress, by the way, voted against it. And she kept to her values. Her values were, she's a Quaker, and Quakers don't believe in war, although we've had some great Quaker generals. But anyway, she chose to vote against it. Now, a couple days after the attack, even though they weren't required to by treaty, the Germans and the Italians went ahead and declared war on the United States. They didn't have to do this because Japan had done the attacking. Japan had not been attacked. But as you guys kind of saw, we were already sinking U-boats, German U-boats. They were already firing at some of our ships, so we just made it official. And a lot of people were wanting us to go to war. They saw every day we waited as a greater and greater chance that Hitler might take over. Got some nice music there to relax to. Clarinet, best instrument ever. Now, Bluebirds was a very popular song at the time. Now, the war will be fought in what was called the European Theater of Operation. And you can kind of see an overview of it here. Now, we are going to focus on the European front. The Allies, America, the British, saw Hitler as a greater threat. And so we would concentrate on Europe first. This was known as the Europe First tactic, right? And the poor guys in the Pacific, even though that's where we'd been attacked at Pearl Harbor, they were told just to kind of hold on, to kind of be tough, right, to make it. Now, as you can see here, it's fought on two fronts. The Soviet or Eastern Front over here, where after the Germans attacked in 1941 and invaded Russia. And then, of course, where we would invade over here from Britain into France, pushing our way through here. But also, as you guys can see, we would invade from southern France, ultimately a few days after D-Day. We invaded in 1943 up through Italy. And there's even the front, the Atlantic. So to say it's two front is a little bit simplistic, but think Europe, think Pacific, but there's also the Atlantic. Now, the first place we would fight the Germans and the British that we fought the Germans was in North Africa. The Italians had invaded North Africa before. It had moved across North Africa towards Egypt when the British fought back and drove them across. Then the Germans came, more about this later, and ultimately we would land on the western part of North Africa and push across with the British coming from the east, kind of like what would happen in Europe, except instead of the British, that's the Russians doing that. Now the USSR is going to fight in the eastern part, right, of Europe, and they're going to drive west. And I'll talk later about the so-called Second Front and everything. Now, some of these videos I have here, y'all, in the interest of time, I'm not going to play, but probably the turning point of the war in Europe, along with, of course, our invasion, was the German-Soviet battle in Stalingrad. Stalingrad, y'all, was a nightmare. There was nothing remotely close to it in the European war. You fought block by block, room by room in some cases. And eventually, the German army was starved out. They were surrounded, and a whole army was captured. There's a good animation here, but I'll avoid that for just a sec, or for you guys. So, now, Hitler's biggest mistake is going to be his invasion of Russia. Remember, he'd made a non-aggression pact with Russia, and June 22nd, 1941, he broke that. He'd wanted to invade earlier, but he'd had to help out his buddy Mussolini, who was having trouble defeating the Greeks. And so he delayed it by 6 weeks. Those were a fatal 6 weeks. but he pushed in 3 different directions, okay? Stalingrad is kind of more down here in the south. It's not really shown on this map, but he pushed in 3 different directions. Leningrad was surrounded. The people there, y'all, were under siege for 900 days. Hundreds of thousands of them died. They got close enough to Moscow. When I was in Moscow in the 80s, y'all, I could actually still see some of the trenches and stuff outside of town. You could see from where the Germans got, you could see the church spires. That's how close they came to taking it. So had they attacked 6 weeks earlier, Leningrad, Moscow may have fallen, and it would have been very different. Now, the important thing to remember about the attack on the Soviet Union is because this broke the non-aggression pact, this is going to lead to the Soviets now becoming our ally. You know, they've been our enemy. Well, they've been on the side of the Germans, not necessarily our enemy, but they've been on the side of the Germans. Now, of course, the enemy of our enemy is our friend. So when we go to war in December, 6 months later, we are going to extend Lend-Lease to them. And we are going to send them tons of tanks and airplanes, not our best stuff, but we send a lot of stuff to them to help them go. Because our idea was if they're killing Germans, that's fewer Germans that we have to kill. But it's important to remember, we were reluctant allies. And so as soon as this war is over and the Germans aren't in the picture, it ain't going to last very long, right? That friendship and a Cold War is going to develop between us and would have been our ally. And all these people are like, but they were our friends. How come they're our enemy? Because that enemy is no longer our common enemy. Here you see 3 million German soldiers, 3,400 tanks. What could possibly go wrong in such an invasion? And of course, Napoleon, he should have known better. He had a bad feeling about Russia, but still went ahead and invaded. He took Moscow. Even that didn't save Napoleon. He had to retreat, and of course, biggest mistake of his life too. Now you can see by this map how far the Axis powers extended. Remember, Axis is what the Germans called themselves, and the Italians called themselves, and the Japanese called themselves. The Japanese had taken Manchuria in the 30s. They'd invaded eastern China. You can see their progress. They had taken Burma and modern-day Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos. They had taken the Dutch East Indies, modern-day Indonesia. They had occupied islands here. They'd even taken a couple islands here, y'all, in the Aleutians. This is the only American territory. Alaska wasn't a state yet, but this is the only actual American territory to fall. I mean, there were islands and things out here, Guam and some of those islands, the Wake Island and some of those. But as far as what becomes states, we actually, a couple of those islands were taken. Now, just more information, Battle of Stalingrad, like I said, just awful, awful turning point, though. And, you know, we were helping them because, again, you can see how long that lasted, y'all, like a year or more, okay? Now, North Africa is where we first fight the Germans, but before us, it's the British. Ernst Rommel, who was nicknamed the Desert Fox, came and bailed out the Italians who had gotten their butts beat by the British and driven all the way back across Egypt and into Libya. And he was an amazing, successful general, brilliant. Even his enemies respected him. Ultimately, he's going to be caught up in the plot to kill Hitler, and he will be forced to commit suicide to save his family. Now, the British tried several different generals with varying amounts of success. Eventually, they found Montgomery or Monty. Now, the only reason he would be important, say, in AP U.S. history is he and Patton, our major general, right, had lots and lots of conflicts. Montgomery was very much he wanted to make sure all his ducks were in a row. He wanted to make sure he had overwhelming forces. He just wasn't the kind to launch an attack on the spur of a moment like a Patton or see an advantage. He always had to wait till everything was perfect. And so he and Patton feuded a lot, and our general, Eisenhower, later president, of course, had to work out these two guys between them. Now, Operation Torch is America's first real encounter with the Germans. The British are pushing Rommel and his Africa Corps back across North Africa towards the west. We invade North Africa on the west coast. Ultimately, General Patton is going to lead our troops there. And finally, after one disastrous battle at Kasserine Pass, Americans and the British kind of trapped these Germans between them. And almost 300,000 German troops surrender as a result. Now, the island we head to next is going to be Sicily here. And Sicily, y'all, is that island. You'll see a picture of it better. It's that island that's kind of like a football off the coast of Italy, like Italy's getting ready to kick it. Here you see a picture of Patton talking to one of his men there. Remember, Old Blood and Guts, as his nickname was. And as I said, Patton and Montgomery did not get along well at all. The goal was to try to get to Messina and cut off any Germans who might be trying to escape over here to Italy. So Patton was upset because he was forced to go up here and to take Palermo, and he was wanting to get over here and beat Montgomery. Montgomery was sent up along the coast. Patton took Palermo, rushed across, and surprised Montgomery by getting there first. Okay, and like I said, there was this kind of competition between us, even though we were allies. And AP could conceivably ask about that. It's in the curriculum. Now, following the taking of Sicily, kind of blocked down here by Mr. D, we invaded Italy. Now, the idea here was Churchill's. He believed that he could push up from Sicily into Italy, and then we would be able to go into Germany through Austria here, through what he called the soft underbelly. So instead of invading where they expected us in France and having to slog through all that, we'll just kind of go like, through their belly. Well, it wasn't such a soft underbelly after all. It's a terrible strategic error, but at least it kind of opened up another front. And that's another thing that AP could ask about, you guys, because Stalin, who felt like he and the Soviet Union were having to do all the fighting, and I hate to agree with Stalin, but basically it was their troops being killed by the thousands like every day. They were taking the real blow. They kept asking for what was called a second front. Please help us out. Well, this, wasn't quite a second front. He was very impatient, but at least it did mean that some Germans had to go down here. And the Germans, indeed, despite our invasions in places like Anzio and Salerno and others where we tried to get behind the Germans, it wasn't until the day before D-Day, y'all, that we actually got to Rome. So this was not the way to get in there, but it did take away some Germans. The Italians, by the way, y'all, they surrendered almost as soon as we landed, and they overthrew Mussolini. Eventually, Hitler will have him rescued, but he'll get captured again, and you'll see what happens to him later. So here's the liberation of Rome, June 4th and 5th. Here's the beautiful Colosseum. I hope you guys can get to Rome someday. It is one of my all-time favorite places. I love Roman history in the first spot. And it's just an amazing town, amazing food, and just obviously so historical. And fortunately, the city was declared an open city and wasn't bombed to smithereens like some other cities were. Okay? By open city, I mean you could go in there and they wouldn't like blow up and fight for every corner like they did Stalingrad. So finally, we come to the invasion at D-Day. Operation Overlord, that's its nickname. You guys know it as D-Day, June 6, 1944. But remember, there's lots of D-Days. Anytime we launched an invasion, it was called D-Day, because that's what you put in all the paperwork. Because you don't know, is it going to be June 1st? Is it going to be like September 1st? But this is the most famous D-Day, and it is the invasion of Normandy, the peninsula. Now, what we would use, and you see them dropping right there, are paratroopers. These paratroopers were dropped the night before. Back here in this picture, and I probably should have included that, you see General Eisenhower talking to some of these paratroopers. These guys, y'all, I mean, they were dropped behind the lines. Their job was to hold important crossroads, to hold bridges, to keep the Germans from being able to send reinforcements to help their men fighting on the beaches. So, I mean, they had what they carried with them, y'all, was what they would have for several days until we could get to them. And of course, if something had happened and the invasion hadn't happened the next day, they would be out on their luck. So I'm going to show you guys a scene, hopefully it will play, from a TV series called Band of Brothers. And you see these guys being dropped and what it must have been like that. Now, of course, you're loaded with stuff in your parachute because you got to, like I said, have to stuff for several days. Now, these are converted DC-3s or C-47s. Flying over into France. Now, what looks like thunder is actually black. Anti-aircraft light. The red light means to get ready. Basically, you hook your line. Or you hook up to the line so when you jump, you get automatic. So you don't panic and forget. So this from a TV show called Band of Brothers. Together. So the Allies landed the next morning on the beaches of the Normandy Peninsula of France. There's a picture of it. Didn't stay up very long, but you can see they sailed from all various parts, and there were 5 major beaches here. A couple of the beaches were British, And one of the beaches was Canadian, and then a couple beaches, Omaha and Utah, were American. That was their code names. The most famous beach, of course, is from the movie Private Ryan. And here's a couple pictures. This is Omaha after the landing. These are the landing craft, and these are what are called barrage balloons. You would have them tied up, feet up above them to keep maybe planes. They had like a metal line going to them. If a plane came through, it could slice its wings off. So it was to keep German planes, which turned out not to be much of a threat, from doing any damage. Now, you're going to see a scene from Private Ryan. This has been edited. It's about 30 minutes normally. This has been cut down to by like 11. Pretty powerful stuff. Once again, when I saw this movie, I could do nothing but salute those people who had gone and endured this. I had a neighbor next door who'd been one of the people who'd landed. Now, fortunately, he landed later in the day and didn't have to endure nearly as much. But those first guys, y'all, that go ashore, it is awful. And this is a Steven Spielberg film called Saving Private Ryan. Here's a little excerpt from it for you guys. Now those things are put there, y'all, so that when you come ashore, the Germans put them there to block and keep you from being able to land your craft and repair the bottom. Massive artillery barrage in advance. Try to soften up where the Germans were. We dropped a lot of bombs by playing for this in the mist. These things are Private Ryan. These are CGI, but aren't quite so good. The Germans, of course, had these thick armor and things. Now the film is showing them hitting. Most of them, to be honest, y'all missed. There you see B-17s dropping these bombs, trying to pave the way for the Americans to come ashore. Here come the landing craft called Higgins boats. They've been in the water for some time, and if you're ever in a boat very long and rocking, you'll get sick really quickly. So yeah, a lot of them were growing up, and you know how it is. When it starts growing up, everybody.
ineffective. We do not hold the beach. Say again. We do not hold the beach.
We're all mixed up, sir. We got the leftovers from Fox Company, Ava Company, and George Company. Look, we got the same and the beach staff. They're killing us, and we don't have a fucking chance, and that ain't fair.
Gather weapons and ammo.
Get the weapons and ammo. Come on, let's try it out.
The Allied forces have attacked. We need reinforcements now. Bangalores! Bring up some Bangalores!
Okay.
Bangalores on the line!
Heads up, players coming your way. Come on, come on, come on, come on.
MG-42's 2 mortars, that 20, left 30.
It's a little deflated over there, but it's the perfect fire position if we get some goddamn armor on the beach.
Gotta open up. Whoa, we gotta get this draw open. Rybins, Mellis, let's get into the war. Grab some cover and put some fire on that crew.
Yes, sir.
Davis, DiBernardo, Young, Wolf, get ready. Covering fire! Sugar Charlie 3, say again, Dog 1 is open. Send in the dozer. I'm waiting here to tie in my flanks. Over.
There's the barrage balloons I was mentioning earlier. Okay, so after tough fighting, we won this beachhead and we began to drive towards Germany, eventually liberating France, Holland, and Belgium. Now, I know it was a long clip, and I hate that they included a lot of non-private Ryan scenes in here, but it gives you guys a really good feel for it. Eventually, I'll show you the whole real thing. We'll go ahead and stop right here.